Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Lost Words Beyond the Page for the Nintendo Switch. I'm generally not a big fan of games that heavily revolve around your emotions getting the better of you while the gameplay itself takes a back seat. I wasn't a huge fan of What Remains of Edith Finch because I wasn't even sure what I was supposed to be crying about half the time. And then you've got other games where they don't really tell you the story, they just expect you to fill in the blanks by using artistic liberties, like Grease, for example. However, where I think Lost Words succeeds where these other games fail is that Lost Words openly tells you what is going on, and the gameplay complements what's going on. So, for example, there are two distinct gameplay styles. The first is taking place within a young girl's journal. Her name is Isabel Cook, and the story focuses around her relationship with her grandmother. However, if that were the only thing this would be, it would just be a sappy movie. However, in the game, you play in a side-scrolling platformer where the words that Isabel writes in her journal are the platforms that she jumps across. It's pretty simple platforming. Usually the most involved you'll have to get is picking up one of the words and using it as a platform for Isabel to get to the end goal. There's no penalty for falling off the edge of the journal. Isabel will just spawn at the top of the screen. Sometimes there's a bookmark that'll get in her way, or sometimes, in a really clever twist, certain words will be highlighted, and as you move them into place, it'll cause certain special effects to happen. So, for example, if you have the word dark and you put it over the sun that Isabel drew, it'll make the world turn dark. Or if you have the word magic, then you'll sprinkle it around to create Isabel's imagination. Overall, even though you're doing fantastical things, you can still feel what Isabel is feeling, and you can also learn from it. In fact, this game even openly says that Isabel's grandmother is Catholic, so it's like the game is doing the Catholic review for me. And the grandmother is very wise and has a lot of really cool sayings that could be applied to real life. So it feels like it's somewhat grounded in reality, which is what I always like. But if that were the only part of the story, this would be pretty boring. The other half is where Isabel is writing a fantasy story, and she kind of self-inserts herself into the protagonist. Now, you have 3 different names that you can give the girl. I chose to call her Grace, because sanctifying grace, you know? And you still play in the same side-scrolling platformy way as in the journal sections, albeit the platforming is slightly more involved, because now you've got a fantasy world, as opposed to just the pages of a journal. However, Grace has an additional power in this fantasy world, and that's using word magic. As she progresses along the narrative, certain words will be highlighted, and then after Grace grabs the words and drags them from the original sentence, then she can use those words again to manipulate the environment. So, for example, the first word she gets is rise, which allows her to make certain objects rise into the air. It's pretty self-explanatory stuff, and a lot of times the puzzles don't require too much thought. Doubly easy is the fact that objects that Isabel or Grace can interact with have a bluish glow to them, so it's not like you can just wreak havoc on the game's world. In fact, this is a pretty linear story, all things considered. There's not really an alternate outside-the-box solution to any of the puzzles. You can't just futz around with the words and hope that you can come up with an alternate solution. You pretty much have to play the game as it wants to be played. Now, there are optional collectibles in the form of fireflies that Grace can find. To my knowledge, they don't really do anything in the story, so it's really more of a completionist benefit. Thankfully, after you complete the game, you have the option to select the chapters, so I imagine that'll be a heck of a lot easier to track down the missing fireflies if you're a completionist. One thing that I really love about Lost Words is that the production values are phenomenal. The voice acting is absolutely amazing, especially the actress that they got to play both Isabel and Grace. as they both really feel like they're exhibiting the emotions that's going on, especially because Isabel narrates Grace's story, and she doesn't just narrate it, she actually gives the words that she's narrating the proper punctuation and emotion that they need. So when Grace is sad, Isabel will narrate the story a lot slower, as though she's also crying and tired in the moment. Then there's also the music, which was performed by a live orchestra. Sometimes there's soft piano and violin pieces. And even though I've heard this over and over again, it never gets old because I just like the quality of the music itself. Maybe I'm just a stickler for real performances. I also really appreciate how this game is fully voiced, which is weird because WarioWare Get It Together wasn't fully voiced, and that was made by Nintendo. This is an indie company. So why is it that indie companies are outdoing these major corporations? It's kind of baffling to me that these low budget projects can get things so right, but then these other companies just, I don't know, maybe it's corporate greed and these indie companies are just interested in making a good game first and foremost and aren't going to be overly concerned with the money. Speaking of the price, this is actually a steal of a price. I paid about $15 for it, and I think I got my money's worth. The story was long enough without dragging on too long, and overall there were a lot of really good life lessons. The story was for the most part pretty clear, like it was easy to tell what was going on in the world, and it was easy to follow along with the character because I could relate to a lot of her struggles. I think the voice acting and the music were phenomenal. The controls worked really well, and besides a couple of slowdowns, the game runs really well. So with that, I highly recommend that you download it. It's not exactly a masterpiece per se, but it's really fun to experiment with the different words and to see how Isabel's story plays out. So with that, I say, yeah, $15 is a pretty good price, and I think you should definitely give it a try. With that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comment section if I missed anything, or if there's any other questions that you have. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and writing can be a great way to sort out your feelings. Bye!